The plot, it thickens. Welcome, everyone, to College Football Coast to Coast. I'm Mark Rogers of MarkRogersTV, and this is your place to be each and every Monday. If you're a college football fan, it's 1 o'clock Eastern time. It's 10 o'clock on the West Coast. I rolled out of bed, and I'm talking college football. It just comes out. And this is what we do again every Monday at 1 o'clock. You can join me in a number of places on Facebook, Mark Rogers TV, also on Twitter. I will follow you back. We'll talk college football at Mark Rogers TV. Wednesday night's a big night. We've got ACC breakdown at 8 o'clock Eastern time, Big 12 at 9, and the Pac-12 breakdown comes your way at 11 o'clock Eastern and 10 o'clock, 8 o'clock on the West Coast. We've got a betting preview show that we do with Peter Loshak from Sportsbook Review. We do that each Tuesday or Wednesday, and get that your way on my YouTube channel at Mark Rogers TV. Also, the Mark and Macy show. Is it Mark and Macy show, or is it just Mark and Macy? Got to figure that out. But we've only done one episode. We had a good time last Thursday night. So that's available to you each and every Thursday night. Mark and Macy, we talk it up. We take a little bit lighter approach to sports, and we're figuring things out. Check out the first pilot episode and check that out and see if you like it. See if you have some suggestions, and write us up and comment on the show and join the discussion, as I like to say often. Join the discussion. I released my Big Ten Power Rankings today. You'll be able to find those on the Saturday Blitz, part of the fan-sided platform. Also, my top 25. So the College Football Playoff Committee gets together, as they are right now. They should be working on this thing. They get together on Tuesday night and release the top 25, and everybody's focused on the Final Four, and for good reason, especially with one game to play for most teams, and with conference championship games to play for those teams that have earned a spot in their conference championship games. So I will release my top 25, which at times differs quite a bit from the College Football Playoff Committee. I do think that they're doing a good job in an impossible situation. All right, and more. So throughout the week, I've got video podcasts released on YouTube constantly. For example, today at 3 o'clock, we bring on David Waters from Gator Sports Radio to talk about Florida's near miss against Florida Atlantic on Saturday. So it would have been kind of amusing, at least for non-SEC fans, to see Florida go to the SEC championship game fresh off a loss to Florida Atlantic, maybe followed by a loss to Florida State. It's an interesting scheduling situation for the Gators and a number of teams in the SEC who schedule the Powder Puff, and then they've got the out-of-conference rivalry, i.e. Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Kentucky, and then they dive possibly into a conference championship game like Florida is this year. But anyway, Florida escapes. We'll talk to David Waters. We'll also discuss the Les Miles coaching situation, which we'll do right here as well. If you'd like to take a seat here and talk to me directly, that's great. Ask your questions off to the side. I can't guarantee I'm going to see them right away. I forgot my contacts. Just went to the eye doctor. This must have been on Friday. Hadn't been there. I couldn't believe it. For 2.5 years, almost 3 years, hadn't been to the eye doctor. So awaiting those new contacts and new glasses. So take a seat and we'll talk some college football, or leave your questions or comments off to the side. Also join me on iTalk SEC. My schedule there is a little bit sporadic. So Mr. Scott Moore of iTalk SEC does a great, mostly college football show, sports show, mostly college football because of where it's located. In the Panhandle, Florida. And that's each night from 5 to 8 Eastern time. And I jump on a few times a week as the lead analyst for iTalk SEC. All right, what did we see last weekend? Okay, we do have somebody who's going to jump on. I believe this is a familiar face, so this should be good stuff here. Here we go. We got David Waters from Gator Sports Radio going to jump on board with us.
Hello.
Hey, David. How are you?
Good. At a rare Monday off because of the holiday week, so I figured I'd join in.
Yeah, jump on in. That's good stuff. So I just started doing this a couple weeks ago, and seems like we're getting some views on YouTube. But in terms of people finding us live, that's a little bit difficult. But we'll get it cranked up here. So I was just mentioning a few short seconds ago about the Gators near miss on Saturday. So I know we're going to cover that ground in a couple hours, but man, your thoughts about Florida Atlantic?
Definitely a lot closer than it should have been. Who knows? It kind of seems the thought was maybe it was the energy, but I think the problems run a little bit deeper than that because it's kind of been a trend now for 3 weeks in a row. So it's not a good look right now, especially going into the FSU and SEC championship game probably against Alabama. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Florida's had a tendency to play to level their competition a little bit this year, so we'll see. We'll see what goes on next.
This is my favorite weekend coming up here in college football. I love New Year's Day. Obviously, things have changed with the college football playoff to a certain degree with New Year's Day, but I still love New Year's Day. And obviously, we all get jacked up for the season openers. But man, when you look at from Friday to Saturday. See here, Iowa, Nebraska, Baylor, TCU, Ohio State, Michigan, USC, UCLA playing for a Pac-12 championship berth. North Carolina's got to beat North Carolina State to extend their hopes. Michigan State's got to beat Penn State in the SEC.
That's a dangerous game.
Alabama, Auburn. Ole Miss, Mississippi State could be a factor in the Egg Bowl if there's a big upset in the Iron Bowl. Your game, Florida State, Notre Dame, Stanford, OU, Oklahoma State. There's not enough TVs around to catch all this stuff.
Definitely not. And like you said, it's definitely one of the best weekends. All the cupcakes are definitely out of the way. So we get there. Most of them are big rival games. That helps a lot. And then we get the championship week next week, but a lot of these teams can't really look forward to the championship week next week or the Big 12. Also playing their extra game next week without the championship. So there's a lot of exciting ball going on, and the SEC West still not really decided. If somehow Auburn beats Alabama, that still leaves the door for Ole Miss, which would be an important Egg Bowl. So we'll see what happens there. A lot of coaching rumors also. So it's a lot of maybe. These games are important for coaching changes coming up as well.
Yeah, I love the rivalries, even if they don't mean anything. Like if Oregon's playing Oregon State and there's not a whole lot on the line, I love the rivalries. But when you've got conference championships on the line and you have college football playoff spots on the line, then it really becomes interesting. So anybody out there who's going to watch, whether it's live right now or it's on the record, David Waters joins us from Gator Sports Radio. Anybody out there that had a few people jump on here, if you'd like to take a seat, we can answer some questions. You can leave your comments. We can talk. Obviously, you have your opportunity on the side there to leave some comments and questions as well. David and I talk about Florida football in the SEC once a week, and we'll get that out to you later today. So besides this Florida State game, if you could only watch one game this weekend, who do you think you're watching?
Probably it's got to be Notre Dame, Stanford. Both teams still, have their, even with Stanford 2 losses, I still think they're, while albeit pretty far, still have an outside shot at the playoff. Notre Dame wins that game, then they're right there with Oklahoma, and that's probably the other game, Oklahoma State. Those 2 games, that's the top 2. I know you only said choose one, but probably those 2. Oklahoma State is right there with Notre Dame, Stanford as far as probably determining that 3rd or 4th seed in the playoff.
Yeah, well, there's no question that Oklahoma State-Oklahoma game that's in Stillwater, Sooners 4.5-point favorite, is directly going to affect the playoff situation. That's the last game of the season for either one. They both tripped up. Sooners seem to be given a little bit more credibility and respect based on what they've done recently. The Texas loss seems to be well into the past and somewhat forgotten at this point. We'll see how they fare in the college football playoff rankings. based on my own background, my own upbringing and so forth, Ohio State, Michigan always takes precedence over anything by far. But the Buckeyes, obviously, with a loss, put themselves in a situation where they need serious help. Still a big game in terms of rankings and obviously the rivalry. But they've been taken off the radar in regards to that game directly affecting anything, unless Penn State can go to Michigan State and pull off an upset that I don't think anybody anticipates. But Penn State's a pretty good football team. But there's actually not even a line on that game, David, because the Connor Cook situation, I'm guessing because he couldn't go against Ohio State. Spartans still pull out a huge win, but no line on that game. But in terms of affecting the playoff, there's just tons of stuff going on here. Iowa, we can't really take it for granted that they're going to beat Nebraska. I think from a talent standpoint, that's a fairly even game. Iowa's just much more disciplined team, much more going on this season. But if you line up recruiting rankings and where those classes that come from, that's a pretty much of a toss-up game, and it's at Lincoln. Do you think Auburn's got any shot against Alabama?
No, I really don't see it.
It's on the Plains.
It is, and Kick Six was there. What, two last time they were there? I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's I'm still sure going to be replaying on the video boards probably 30 times during the pregame, just so Alabama can't get it out of their head. But I'm like you. You mentioned the Big Ten games. I think that Penn State game is scary for Michigan State. Michigan State, even after beating Ohio State, have pretty much played to the level of their competition all season. Haven't looked impressive in pretty much any win they had this year. So they let James Franklin and that Penn State offense hang around a little bit. That's a scary game. Like you said, Michigan State doesn't really know who the quarterback's going to be maybe yet, or maybe just keeping it quiet. But to see, not sure they can sit there and run the ball over and over and over again like they did against Ohio State. That was pretty much weather driven, and probably caught Ohio State off guard a little bit with some of the option that was going on. That was a good coaching job by D'Antonio. That was some stuff we haven't seen from Michigan State all season, and to come out of there. But I really think that I think that's a scary game for Michigan State. How much did they really put into this Ohio State game? I'm going to say definitely a lot. So is there any type of hangover?
Yeah, you would think so, man. That's been the game that's been pegged in the Big Ten since the offseason, since the two battled it out for the championship to a certain extent last year, and the Buckeyes won the national championship. That's been the game on the calendar, especially for Michigan State, and they go and they pull it off. And Penn State, I'm sure a lot of people out there haven't seen Penn State play because they haven't been on the radar because of obviously the sanctions and then the ramifications from that have the program's taken a hit. I don't think it's taken anywhere close to the hit that a lot of people anticipated. Bill O'Brien did a great job. So, James Franklin takes over. They're a strange team. They have an NFL quarterback without a doubt, and they have a horrible offensive line. like he is under siege all the time. So that's where it usually hurts you when you don't have the scholarships, offensive line, defensive line, depth, special teams, and you can see it with Penn State. They've got guys that have a chance to play in the NFL at wide receiver. They've got some really good wide receivers. They've got a good freshman back in Saquon Barkley. So they have playmakers on offense, but they have trouble distributing the football just because they can't block. And on defense, the back seven's a little rough in spots. The defensive line is great. They have a great defensive line. They could pose some problems because they're one of those teams that kind of like USC's been the last couple of years where, man, they have some great players in spots, but they just lack depth and they have some huge holes and issues. So if they can cover them up and go in there and have some people play over their heads, that could be a scary situation, as we've seen with Michigan State this year, David. They just haven't run away from anybody. So that could be one that gets a bit nervous in Spartan Stadium in the fourth quarter. What do you think about the Rebels and the Bulldogs? Obviously, when that game is played, Ole Miss is going to know whether Alabama's lost, and there's extra incentive. You would think in the Egg Bowl, big rivalry. That's a game I covered for 6 years down there. that they wouldn't need the incentive, but hey, they're 19 and 20-year-olds.
And which Ole Miss team shows up? We've seen as how good they can be, and we've seen how bad they can be. The real bad loss to Florida, the Memphis loss, and then they come back. Of course, they beat Alabama earlier in the season, and then they stopped this Arkansas team that was on fire. So who knows what Ole Miss team shows up, and then Dak Prescott, one of the best players in the nation, can completely. My bad. This past weekend with Mississippi State in Arkansas, not Ole Miss, Arkansas. But and what type of game does Prescott have? And it's we've seen what he can do. He's one of the best players in the nation. Can completely take over a game. I think it's going to be a good high scoring game. I don't think this is going to be your typical low score SEC game. Probably going to look a lot like the Mississippi State Arkansas game from this past weekend. If I had to pick, I'd probably go Mississippi State, but just no other reason than just a pure guess.
Yeah, I'm not ready to pick any games. David, we've got Dan jumping on the line with us here, so I'm guessing we're going to talk Iron Bowl. I'm just making a guess. I'm taking a stab at it.
No, nothing in particular about the Iron Bowl, but I do agree with David. You never know what Ole Miss is going to bring, what team is going to show up, because they've been a little bit all over the place with that Egg Bowl game. But I did have a question for you if you're ready to take a question.
Sure, definitely.
What is the scuttlebutt and what's the speculation on the Les Miles situation? Are they gonna get rid of him? Do you think it's a good move, a bad move? I don't know. I'm kind of.
David, you want to lead off?
Sure.
Don't even want to touch that, or?
No, I do. I'm shaking my head that I don't know how in the world they can get rid of Les Miles.
I agree.
I mean, yes, I know they're disappointed. They've lost 5 straight against Alabama. They haven't looked the same against Alabama since they lost in the rematch national championship game. But I mean, you're setting a dangerous precedent for whoever you get is coming in, whoever the next guy is. What does he have to do? I mean, is he going to be any better than Les Miles? It's just a dangerous precedent. And this guy, whoever they get, is going to have a ton of pressure on him from day one. And right now, Les Miles has, of LSU #1 recruiting class according to ESPN. What happens there? So it's there's never a terrible season under Les Miles. I mean, and yes, it's been a little downtrodden, but it was 3 weeks ago they were ranked #2 in the nation. And it seems like the Alabama game just took all the steam out of them. But right now, not this year. I just don't think you can get rid of him.
That was one of my thoughts on it, David. Who are you going to replace him with? Who that you think is going to do any better? I can't think of anybody right now, but
yeah, you can look at this from a number of directions, and you guys hit on maybe the most important, because it's one thing to say this guy's not getting it done at the level we want to get it done, but who out there is going to come in and get it done to the level that LSU expects? Looking at the entire situation, it's hard for me to even 10 or 11 years into his tenure to evaluate from one standpoint. Nick Saban built that program. You guys know as well as I do. I was down there covering the SEC at the point before LSU. Les Miles arrived. LSU. It's hard to believe now that they played 500 football for about 12 years, from the late 80s up until Nick Saban arrived, and he built the program. And then Les Miles takes over, and he's had to be more than a caretaker. He's been there for too long. And so we assume now, and I think people that are criticizing Les Miles and the performance on the field forget that you can lose at LSU. They just figure he's at LSU, they should be automatic wins, but that's not always been the case. He has locked down the state of Louisiana, as David points out, and he's gone elsewhere. And his recruiting classes have almost been too good. He's lost more talent to the NFL early than any program in the country by far. It's not even that close. So he has guys moving on to the league quicker than anybody else. But it is difficult because the standard is to compete for the SEC Western Division Championship, and they haven't done that really since 2011. they've had, man, this year they got dominated by Alabama, but the very near misses the previous 3 seasons.
Which is arguably the toughest, sub-comp or subdivision in the country.
Yes.
That SEC West is like, I mean, they beat each other up usually.
Yep.
And this thing, I mean, I'm watching Sunday Night Football last night, and it seems every other player mentioned in their college is LSU. I mean, it just, and the talent is there. I mean, I think we can all agree on what's the one thing, and for some reason, what's the one thing LSU hasn't had in its last, few seasons, and it's just a quarterback. And I can't figure out why. The talent is there. I mean, you can see, especially with the wide receivers, they keep producing in the NFL as well. And, it's just if they can get that quarterback, but maybe that's, that seems like a broken record. Maybe that's part of the problem. We've said for years if they can just get that quarterback, and maybe I've heard his relationship with the boosters aren't that great. And that's probably part of the reason they're willing to pay this crazy $15 million buyout. And the hot rumor is here in Florida, if I don't think it will happen, but as LSU's number one guy would be Jimbo Fisher from FSU. So who knows? Yeah. Who knows the domino effect? If it happens, this could have.
Now, if they can pull that off, what do you think of that hire, Dan?
I don't know if that's necessarily any better. I really don't. I mean, he's Jimbo Fisher. That's. I just don't know that that's any better.
Okay, my issue always with Les Miles has been on the plus side. Those kids run through a wall for him. He inspires those kids. They love him. And also the recruiting, I even tend to take it for granted, but it's improved considerably since Saban and then Les Miles. They lost those kids before to Florida State. They left the state, the very elite guys from Louisiana throughout the 90s and into the 2000s, basically when Saban got there. But game management, clock management, having a game plan, those two things. I think the clock management's obvious. He's had those gaffes his entire career repeatedly. They're almost comic. The gaffes that he's had with time management and game management. It's funny because this season he hasn't had one, but almost every season I could point to the one at Ole Miss, the one he escaped in Death Valley against Tennessee, but they got the reprieve from the refs. He's had a number of them, but he hasn't had one of those this year. If I was going to retain Les Miles, I'd tell him to get a clock management coach.
If only Florida could have stopped that field goal, then there's your point.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other one that comes to mind. Yeah, he's had several.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I appreciate you fielding that question. I'll drop out. I'll continue to listen, and if I have another question, I'll pop back in.
Yeah, jump back in. We're trying to knock this out every Monday at 1:00. I've jumped on here the last few weeks.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, David. If all works out, I guess I'll see you in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know how forward I should look to it, but we'll see.
All right.
See you, Dan. Yeah, you got a little work to do before the Crimson Tide in Atlanta.
Yeah, that one might get ugly. This Gator offensive line right now is beat up, so it's not a good matchup at all. But who knows? Once you get there, who knows?
Yeah, we'll mention to some folks that here in a couple hours I got another show at 2:00, and then at 3:00, David and I are going to jump on Google Hangouts. We're going to talk some Les Miles. We're also going to talk Florida football as the Gators wipe the sweat from the brow and considering that scare against Florida Atlantic and move on to Florida State coming up this Saturday, one of the great rivalries in college football that is huge for the Gators in this improbable effort to get to a college football playoff. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Regardless of what Florida does the last few games of the season, the accomplishments of this season, they've been locked and loaded to win the East over Georgia, who was a huge favorite, over Tennessee that seemed to be up and coming, against Missouri, who's won 2 straight, is an incredible accomplishment for Jim McElwain, considering some of the challenges of personnel issues along the offensive line in particular, and a quarterback situation. And he loses the guy that comes in and beats Tennessee and really seemed like he was developing. And unfortunately, we got the news a few days ago that Will Grier has not won his attempt to get back that that suspension time, David.
Right, yeah, we haven't really had a chance to hit on that. The appeal, the NCAA denied it. So Greer will miss the first 6 games of next year, probably will not be able to come back until Florida plays Missouri. So I think it'll be Missouri, bye week Georgia. So, it's going to be kind of weird to see where Florida is at during that point of the season. If they're playing good, do you insert Greer back in there? If they're playing bad, they'll probably have no choice but to put him back in there. But as the way, with the way Treon Harris has looked right now, there's no telling what the Gator offense will look like next year. I would say Greer would probably come back in and play. Luke Del Rio, who is has to sit out this year, may be the guy to start the first half of next year. Who knows what freshman they bring in? But if you have to play a freshman starting next year, your results are probably not going to be where they want to be anyway. So in my opinion, in my eyes, it's probably going to be Luke Del Rio. If McElwain wants to run his style, his style of bit of offense, probably be Luke Del Rio. And if not, then maybe he incorporates more of a spread option element, during the offseason to help Treon's skill set. But from what I've seen from Treon, this last 3 or 4 games, there's no way that Florida could go into next year and thinking they can replicate what they've done this year.
Yeah, Jocelyn over here making tons of comments. Obviously a Gators fan, so
yeah,
I'm surrounded by Gators right now. But that's okay. It's a huge weekend.
We're excited right now. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've been on the radar this late in the season. 2012 people forget about, but again, I will claim that even though Alabama won the national championship that year, that in the regular season that was the best defense in the country. That defense just completely dragged that team through the schedule and almost got to the SEC championship game, but couldn't overcome 6 turnovers against Georgia, even though you only gave up 110 yards of offense.
Right.
So that was a great defense, and it ended at the Sugar Bowl that year. But this Florida State team, people tend to, we're so focused on the college football playoff as even a program as prominent as Florida State gets pushed aside when they lose that second game. And once they lost to Clemson, that was it for Florida State, and nobody's paying much attention to Florida State. But still, you got one of the best backs in the country in Dalvin Cook. He has almost single-handedly won some games that you can't imagine Florida State would lose. I watched the South Florida game. They were scuffling in that game against the Bulls, and he made 3 or 4 plays that won it. Same thing against Wake Forest. It's difficult to imagine Florida State struggling and almost losing to Wake Forest, but Dalvin Cook had to make plays in the fourth quarter to win that game. They couldn't move the ball against BC. Same thing happened there. You look at what they've recruited at wide receiver and bringing in Everett Golson, you wouldn't think that they would have issues on offense, but I think it's much like the situation at Florida, and we're seeing with Ohio State a little bit where the pieces don't always add up to what it should, plus the offensive line's been an issue. But that defense is serious at Florida State. They had Deshaun Watson down to 13 points with about 6 or 7 minutes left to play, and they had held Clemson. We see the Tigers scoring 40 a week. That Florida State defense is still pretty close to the gold standard, pretty close to what they've been, David.
I agree. You got that Northrup, Jalen Ramsey and Derwin James, and their secondary. They can probably lay claim just as good as Florida and LSU can to that DBU. I mean, FSU, they're very talented. That Florida talent that they recruit there is just as good. And like you said, you go back to the offense. They've maybe hit a better stride once they went back to Sean McGuire. Not really back to him, but he did play a little bit last year. Didn't start this year, but you're right. I mean, Dalvin Cook is that offense, and they roll with it as he rolls. And in my opinion, he's just as good as Derrick Henry and Leonard Fournette. There's not much difference to me. He makes the plays. He makes the big plays. He keeps that offense rolling. It is going to be interesting, and going back and looking at it, this is going to kind of like we talked about for, the Florida LSU game is, if Florida could hold Fournette down, they could, have that win that game. They held him down marginally. He got his yards, but he didn't break crazy like he did against other teams. So that's what Florida's going to have to do against FSU as well. contain Cook as much as they can and force McGuire and his FSU receivers to beat that talented Florida secondary.
Yeah, McGuire's a pretty functional quarterback. He's not great. He's mobile to an extent. He's not Golson in terms of breaking, contain, and making plays with his feet, but he can move around and burn you if you give him a gap. But he's a pretty good passer. He's a good player. He's not a top quarterback. That's why he doesn't have the job. But yeah, he's proven capable. Should have beat Clemson last year. He had that game won, and Florida State put it on or Clemson put it on. Let me back up there. Florida State won that game in overtime. They shouldn't have won the game, but they pulled that game out against Clemson when Clemson put it on the turf there late in the game, trying to ice the game. But yeah, should be another good one that I got to see. Florida State. That's another one that's marked on my calendar every year, but especially this year with what Florida's done. And even on the road, the Seminoles come in as a 2-point favorite, which I guess shouldn't shock us.
Well, considering I guess the real shock would be Florida actually opened up as the 2.5 point favorite, and it has swung all the way that quickly. Yeah, it swung. So
yeah, I think people are paying a little too much attention to scores.
Yeah, I completely agree. It should have been. I was surprised myself when Florida opened up as the favorite, even at home with the way they've been playing the last 3 weeks. So.
Yeah, I don't know who's going to win this game. I'm going to have to make a pick later in the week, so I'll figure it out or hopefully figure it out. But, yeah, I've got a little bit more confidence in Florida State at this point, considering what the Gators have shown on offense for the past 4 or 5 weeks. But, yeah, at the Swamp, that's going to be a tough one for the Seminoles to pull out. And they're very similar teams in having the issues at quarterback, having the issues getting the ball to playmakers because of the offensive line issues.
And I'll say this, I was in the stadium in Urban Meyer's first year at Florida, and he had FSU at home. That was really the game, that started the ball rolling for Florida recruiting under Urban Meyer. It was, his first year, the offense was there. But it wasn't taking off as we knew the Urban Meyer offense yet. But that home game against FSU that year, where Florida really just controlled the game, got out, and the crowd was behind it, all the recruits were there. That really started the ball rolling for Florida, in my opinion. So it'd be interesting to see if Michael Wayne can capitalize on that too. There's going to be a ton of Florida recruits in the stadium, and it's going to be interesting to see if Michael Wayne can get the Gators ready. He says the energy was part of the problem, the last couple of weeks, but I don't think that's really an excuse playing at home. So, they will be ready for FSU, but we'll see if the other problems still arise.
All right, folks, David and I could talk college football all day, especially on this weekend. I do have another show at 2:00, and I have to do a number of things before that. I usually don't prep for these things, but it's a production show, so I can't just rant on about college football. I've got to be a little bit prepared. So I want to remind everyone that David and I get together once a week. We're going to do that a little bit later this afternoon at 3:00 on Google Hangouts, and we crank out a breakdown of the past Florida game, look ahead to the Gators game this week, obviously, against Florida State, look elsewhere around the SEC. David's a wealth of knowledge about Florida football and the SEC in general. So we do that each and every week. You can find that on YouTube. Go back and look at the video podcast there. And we've got a number of platforms that we're on. Find us on Twitter. Find us on Facebook as well. But especially Twitter if you want to talk some college football with us. And I'm going to have my Big Ten power rankings out a little bit later this week. So obviously a big shakeup there. You can catch me at times on iTalk SEC coming out of Destin, Florida, that radio show. And I've got to get those top 25 selections out before the College Football Playoff Committee so we can kind of compare our rankings from there. So appreciate everybody jumping on board. Small audience here, but that's what we expect. We just started doing this a couple weeks ago, but we get a lot more views on YouTube. Again, my channel's MarkRogersTV. So, hey, everyone, thanks for jumping on. Appreciate it. Hope to catch you next week at 1:00 Eastern right here on Blab. David, thanks so much so I didn't have to sit here and talk for 30 minutes without shutting up. So I appreciate you jumping on.
No problem. See you later.